Welcome back to the Liberty Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we explore how to build freedom through the entrepreneurial process. Our goal is to provide you with the tools and mindset needed to create your lifestyle of independence and flexibility. I'm your host, Ash Whitener, and this is episode 4, Our Athletes Entrepreneurs, with our guest, Fergus Hodgson, editor-in-chief of the PanAm Post. Please follow us on Twitter at LibertyEPodcast and Facebook/Liberty Entrepreneurs. Show notes are found on our website, libertyentrepreneurs.com, and on YouTube. Enjoy the show. Today's guest is Fergus Hodgson, editor-in-chief of the PanAm Post, a bilingual media outlet that spans the Americas. Fergus is also an economic consultant based in Miami, Florida, and has been published in New Zealand, Canada, and U.S. outlets, including the Charlotte Observer, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and the Providence Journal, and has also appeared on TV networks such as Fox Business and Russia Today. Originally from New Zealand, he studied economics at Boston University on a rowing scholarship. Please follow him on Twitter and on Facebook in the show notes. Fergus, welcome to the show.
Ash, it's my pleasure, and I want to say that I really support the theme or what you're trying to do with this podcast.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on the show and helping us get yet another personal experience of an entrepreneur and your journey and the mindset that's needed to create this type of flexible life. One of the most important areas, I think, of an entrepreneur is that flexible life. And I've followed you for over a year now in your journeys throughout Latin America, mostly giving speeches or going to conferences or just working at PanAm Post and all your experiences there. But before we get into that, can you tell me what was your first entrepreneurial experience?
Sure. Actually, well, it ties in well to your last show because I did listen to your first episode. And that man had a similar experience where I think back to my earliest school days. This is in Glen Massey in rural New Zealand, and only about 150 people lived in that village, actually. But some of the students were selling, it's called sherbet, or this form of candy that was actually, it started to boom, this little trade. And I just remember Mr. Brown, my old principal, who's actually passed away now, but he just said after maybe a couple of months of this and with this trade going on, for some reason he didn't like it. I'm not really sure why he had a problem with it, but he just said we're going to put a 50% tax on that, and immediately that was just the end of the industry.
So what grade was this?
We don't use grades in New Zealand, but it was not exclusive to one grade. It would have been about, I'm thinking 8 to 10-year-olds.
Okay, so they saw these 8 to 10-year-olds in school selling sherbet or this type of candy in New Zealand. And the school didn't want it for whatever or obvious reasons and applied a 50% tax to this.
Yeah, but obviously no one was going to go through the process of formalizing his business and paying a tax on it. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Can you imagine that, an 8-year-old formalizing?
No. It was patronizing almost to an 8-year-old to think that I should have to go and go through this process. And I think the parents were even a bit sad too, because often the parents were helping the children to engage in this process. They weren't just doing it on their own, of course.
Yeah, it's a great experience. I mean, especially for the bond between the parent and the child to understand this freedom of selling and buying and making these voluntary relationships. I mean, it's not very difficult for us to understand why the school wouldn't want that in their classrooms. So just like Stephen McCaskill showed that he was actually selling candy, you saw these children selling candy, and what was that like for you? Do you remember back then?
Yeah, I didn't really understand it. I mean, so that's the problem, that the whole idea of trade or exchange is absent. It's seemingly absent from the basic, conventional educational platform, and I never really enjoyed that. I mean, I didn't understand why I didn't enjoy it at the time. Now it seems clear to me, but it was just a stale environment. And as I got older, I had less and less respect or patience with my teachers. And the life that I have now, outside of both university and elementary and high school, is just a world apart. And I can hardly believe that I had to go through those years. I see it as such a black hole or a waste of time in my life.
Yeah, I agree. And, a lot of people think the same a mentor of mine and somebody who I look up to, Brett Venat from School Sucks, has a wonderful podcast about,
Right.
specifically the school system and what children are learning or lack thereof. So talk to me about your actual first entrepreneur experience.
Going out on my own, my first experience really was in athletics. And this even predates, I got an athletic scholarship to go to the United States, but it predates that because even though I didn't enjoy school at all, I basically built my own little enterprise of being an athlete. I planned on even though I was just a kid, maybe 10 years old, I used to do lots of training plans, and I basically, I toured the country. I went to Australia, and this was my, where I sort of sought my performance. And so when I finished high school, I naturally wanted to, gain the most value, and I left the conventional New Zealand life, and I went and spent 4 years in the United States on a full scholarship, and had a wonderful experience. Well, not necessarily wonderful, but I was able to find or take my value where it was more appreciated, where people would pay more for it.
Yeah, that's interesting that even at a young age, you saw yourself almost like your own little company, and you needed to continue to find value in yourself, just like people do in their company. But you kept building that value, and then you went out on the marketplace. You saw that in New Zealand, and I imagine you probably looked in Australia, there wasn't a lot of demand or resources being allocated for your talent and your value. So you looked over to the United States, and you got a scholarship. Was it to Boston University?
That's correct. And I think the interest to me in athletics at that time was seeing the connection between your own actions or your own investments and outcomes. When you're an employee, that connection becomes often muddied and much less. And at a very young age, I realized that if I could invest my time, my intellect into my athletics, that I would see a profit from that. And the greatest profit I could find was in the United States.
Yeah, so take us through how you started qualifying places to try to sell your product, which was your athletic abilities, and just how you weren't able to find something in your home country, New Zealand, and what that was like to go to the United States and try to find someone who was both able to see your value being an athlete and then offer you the scholarship.
Mate, it was actually a much more complicated and drawn out process than one might realize, with paperwork, lots of paperwork, and I hired an agent because there was a knowledge problem, right? Because one, I didn't know the universities. It seems crazy to me now because when I was in New Zealand, I'd never even heard of MIT, which is one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. And so when they contacted me, I didn't even know who they were. And so there was a great knowledge problem between me, and they didn't really know who I was too. But we recruited an agent. I went for a trip to the United States, to Boston, and I met with a whole bunch of coaches. And so I got multiple offers from different colleges. It was a very drawn-out process. And it's like everything, there's a risk you take. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. You try to pick the place that would fit the best. And whether I made the right decision in terms of the college I chose, I don't really know. I mean, you just go with it. You have to pick one and accept that's the and stick with it, basically, because there wasn't really any process for transferring anything like that. And so I did hire an agent, and then later on I basically became an agent in my own right, because other athletes from New Zealand came to me for wisdom as to how to pull this off.
Well, that is very interesting. Sorry to interrupt you there. You're learning this process of becoming an entrepreneur and selling your product, your health, your athleticism, and going through and doing the interviews and selling yourself to these different colleges, and then you created a market for yourself. It sounds like this wasn't something that had a lot of experience where in New Zealand, and so people started seeking you out. Did you create some type of consulting, or did you do this just pro bono?
No, it was just pro bono. I was a college student at the time, and these were just other athletic friends of mine, and it didn't necessarily work out because one person did have great success and come and join me, but most people did not want to go through the effort, the hassle, and I thought it was a mistake on their part, but I can't force them to change their view. I just thought that, yes, there's a lot of work. You've got to do all these exams, which we don't have in New Zealand. You've got to apply for the certain visas, and then you've got to get the college athletic conference approval that you're legitimate or whatever. And then even when you get to the United States, you've got all these fitness tests and medical tests, and I just thought this is insane because in New Zealand, we don't have any of that. You just get on your boat and you go and race. But
Right.
so I learned what it's like in a more bureaucratized or formal championship, and how to navigate that. Yeah, to how to get the return. And I'm glad I did it because yeah, they did pay a considerable amount of money, and then travel. They took me touring to England and across all the United States. So yeah, they gave me a huge return. And beyond that, it's a networking effect. I mean, yeah, I didn't decide to go into a long-term consulting practice or agency practice with helping these people. What happened actually when I got to the United States is that I started tutoring economics on a private basis, and so people would just pay me cash to get them A's in economics, basically.
You told us that some of your peers, the people that you were, the athletes that you were trying to help through this process, they didn't have some of the will or the drive or some of the characteristics that you thought were going to be needed to be successful as an athlete on the collegiate level. What are some of those characteristics that you think that you had, or that just people in general in your sport had, that made them successful?
Well, it depends a lot on the environment, right? Because each sport has a different culture, and each place within a sport has a different culture too. And it's just a very peculiar. College sports in the United States are just very peculiar. And I basically had to suck it up and accept a lot of criticism or a lot of aggression from my coaches. And I don't necessarily feel good saying that, actually, but that was just what happened. That it was a very militant athletic culture, and my coaches even made us watch documentaries about the U.S. Special Forces and all these sorts of things, as though there were some kind of examples for us, which of course I didn't respect even in those days. So I actually had a lot of problems with it, and because of the cultural challenge, and it didn't necessarily work out as smoothly as I planned. And my view was just that I wrote even basically consulting papers, not paid for, not solicited, to my coaches and to the athletic department about concerns I had and how we could improve, because we had basically the best athletes in the country, and because they recruited them from all around the world like me, and we're not winning the championship. And I tried to explain why, but of course that did not do any good. And it was a lesson that the customer is always right to some degree. That at that time, my customer was the athletic department and my coaches, and telling my customer what they wanted was not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, that's interesting, since you had such a different perspective coming over from New Zealand, someone that may not know a whole lot at that age about United States culture or the importance of the dominance of the United States military. This would seem pretty foreign to you, and maybe even a bit, standoffish, because you're someone.
Yeah, mate.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because first, the coaches would swear at us and yell at us all the time. And I would just say to them, I'm an adult. Just talk to me in a proper fashion, thank you. But of course, they would just drive them crazy. And so it was odd. I mean, other athletes just took it. Even though they agreed with me, they just took it on the chin. They just knew better than I as to how to accept authority, I guess.
And were these other athletes American citizens or American people?
No, we had some Americans, but actually the majority of the team were foreign. We had Canadians, Germans, a couple of Australians, and so, but we had to basically accept the scenario, because at that time, one man made the rules. And yeah, he was paying the bills, and if you didn't accept it, he would make your life difficult. And that was somewhat of my worst brush with authority to some degree, because even though I didn't realize it at the time, but because I challenged his authority, not in a violent way, of course, just by challenging the thinking he was applying, because we had such different training and different mentality in New Zealand, and I thought we were so much smarter, and I thought we could do a lot better, whatever. But he basically used his position to make my life difficult elsewhere. So, for example, I would never get any awards from the athletic department. That would just be like unthinkable. Even if I was one of the top athletes in the department, it didn't make any difference.
Right, because you weren't falling into line.
Yeah, exactly. That's just the way the world works, right? I mean, you don't get a knighthood in the British Empire for telling the monarchy that they're, doing a bad job.
Yeah, we don't see any awards being given to Edward Snowden, do we?
No, of course not. Right. Well, not from those in power. Yeah.
Right. So let's switch gears a bit. I know that you've recently visited Cuba, and Cuba's been
Right.
in the American news because Obama has opened up trade and travel with Cuba. Can you give us some of your experience with Cuba firsthand?
Sure. Well, first, actually, it's not actually correct. I mean, I don't blame you for thinking this, but he has not opened up trade. That's actually not true. That the embargo, as it stands, is exactly as it was before. So there's still an economic embargo on Cuba, and the change last year was there was basically a Cuban embassy was accepted in the United States, and the U.S. reciprocated that in Cuba. And the only real negotiation or reconciliation was that the Cuban regime released some prisoners, including a prominent one, back to the U.S., and the U.S. released some inmates as well, although the Cuban inmates were actually spies who had killed people. So releasing them wasn't such a fancy or good thing to do. Yeah, but in terms of me going there, the challenge is this, mate. We in the media, in popular culture, there are these views that precipitate about Cuba, and I think they're grossly inaccurate. And even just last night, I was speaking through Twitter with a Cuban expat, and she is just, or exile, and she was just so frustrated and doesn't understand how people don't understand what is going on in Cuba. And so I wanted to have more authority on the topic because already I'd made great efforts to read about, to study about Cuba. I took a course at the University of Miami, and I've been covering it for years. But I just thought unless I went there and saw it, I would have less credibility on the topic.
Sure. Can you tell us one thing that you saw there that surprised you or something that took you off guard?
Oh, mate, many things. One thing that is perhaps the most interesting for foreigners would be that Cubans don't trust each other. That the culture of communism for more than 50 years has just created everyone a great suspicion that permeates the country. That people have, in order to live, you basically have to steal. Unless you have family abroad who can send you money, because just making a living out of the salaries on offer is just not really. It's just not on the cards. It just doesn't suffice. So there's a great deal of hostility within the people towards each other, and even when they leave the country, often Cubans will just say to me openly, "I don't really want to be around Cubans."
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, a part of the market is voluntary action, and to do
Right.
that, you need to find people that you can do business with, trade goods for, right?
Mm.
If it makes sense to me that under a communist regime, which at almost every attempt tries to break the market, break the back of the market, make people not trust the market, greedy capitalist or
Right.
whatever you want to say, it would make sense then that this paranoia that doesn't really exist in the free marketplace, but government would create this paranoia around the market. And who's the market? Well, the market's your friends, and the market's your
Right.
neighbors, and the market's the guy down the street that has the butcher shop. But now if you're unable to come to the point where you think you can do business with these people, yeah, that's caused by that type of communist intervention. I find that very interesting. Whereas in the United States, where there is I'll say a thriving market, not nearly as thriving as it would be, of course, if we removed the unnecessary government regulations and taxation
Right.
and such. But I don't feel a sense of just overall distrust with the people that I interact with on a daily basis to maybe buy a cup of coffee or, maybe have someone design a website for me or something like that.
Right. Well, trust is such an essential ingredient to the functioning of business or trade, because the opposite of when everyone is distrustful is that you don't want to invest. You don't want to engage in a transaction. You're going to spend enormous funds on investigating people. There's a huge amount of waste. And I grew up in rural New Zealand, where yes, your handshake is your bond, and that was just the way we thought. So of course, it's very strange to me. And yeah, so if you don't have to go, say when we would do the hay baling on the farm, there was no contract. There was just a guy in the village who would come up and he'd say, "Yeah, this is how much we'll charge," and then we'll pay it. We'll pay it once it's done. And yeah, so that makes things so much smoother and easier.
Yeah. So I like your use of the word trust there, because Bitcoin has helped us create a trustless form of money. How did you see Bitcoin being used, if at all, and did you see any type of innovation with regards to Bitcoin in Cuba?
Bitcoin, Cuba, no. The only use of Bitcoin that I know of is by the Cuban Anarcho-Capitalist Club, and I'm friendly with the two co-founders of the group, and they just use it as a way to get donations for their organization, right? Because they obviously have no money, and any they can get, and then the Bitcoin allows you to get around some kind of currency controls. However, I don't know how they then cash that out into the local currency. I'm not sure how they get around that, but it's still a very, very new commodity or new means of exchange in Cuba. There are plans to have, a conference there among the anarcho-capitalists, and I think it may focus specifically on Bitcoin. But I would hardly say that it's in use there yet.
Yeah, I would expect that areas like Cuba or Venezuela or Argentina, some of these places with currency issues, currency controls, etc., would slowly start figuring out, hey, Bitcoin can't be manipulated by the state. It seems like a safe haven for me. Even if a lot of people aren't accepting it as payment right now, let me at least get out of the Bolivar, for instance, and try to get into something that has any type of stability. I would think that these are the economies that are kindling for the spark of Bitcoin, whereas in the United States, we don't really need Bitcoin right now. The average person thinks, hey, my Visa debit card works just fine, or my PayPal, or now I can send money on Facebook. There's no real pain that Bitcoin's solving other than some privacy pain in the United States, unlike Cuba or some of these other countries.
Right. Well, let me just respond to that quickly, because I'm very familiar with Bitcoin. More broadly speaking, I've covered it a lot in my work, and the challenge I see is that people in these other countries still have way more confidence in the U.S. dollar than in Bitcoin. And you and I might have problems with the U.S. dollar and think that it's a bad currency and that there should not be such reliance on it internationally. But these people in these other countries are much more likely to just switch their transactions to U.S. dollars than to Bitcoin, even if it's illegal to do so. And so the Bitcoin still has a challenge of basically showing that it has more stable, or there are more people who are willing to use it than the U.S. dollar. And that may come, but that's what I've seen in Venezuela in particular.
Yeah, and I saw the same in Barbados and St. Vincent and Panama, and especially Argentina when I was there for the 2013 Latin American Bitcoin Conference. We went to exchange our dollars for Argentinian pesos and got well above what the government rate was. Since then, that was almost 2 years ago, there's been about 40% inflation of the Argentinian peso when compared to the US dollar. So that's a conclusion, Fergus, that took me a long time to understand as well. And it took many years of me living out of the country to see how people really want to have the US dollar. Why is it because the US dollar is going to be the best currency forever? Well, no, they're not worried about that. They know that they've been screwed over time after time again by their local governments, by their domestic governments, and have no faith in the currency that they are forced to use. Just like we're forced to use the dollar, they're forced to use some inferior currency to the US dollar. So that is the safe haven. I can even tell you that, I have experience in the offshore banking industry, and while we had no U.S. clients, no U.S. corporations, no ties to the U.S. whatsoever, still around 35 to 40% of our transaction volume was in the U.S. dollar. So there's, like you said, there's huge demand out there. Even in Panama, we use the U.S. dollar. Whenever I go to an ATM and pull cash out, it's all in U.S. dollars. So there's a thriving demand for U.S. dollars for now in the world. Yes, as we know, empires collapse and fiat currency eventually goes to zero. But I agree with you. The U.S. dollar is the world's currency for now.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the PanAm Post. Can you tell us what your role is there and just what the PanAm Post is?
Yeah, well, the PanAm Post is a startup media outlet. So I'm basically acting as an entrepreneur but I'm not the actual owner of the project. So I have an investor who works alongside me. And that's what I think is probably most interesting to your listeners, how you can actually make a media outlet profitable in this era. And let's just say that not many people are pulling this off. And we're still, we're 2 years into the project, and we've built up a large audience, but we're still working on the profitability side as well. So that's the greatest challenge to me, and the most fascinating one too, because you've got to, again, match your efforts with value in the market. And even when the market is basically flooded with other material, you've got to work out where are there niche interests or strong demand for particular items that are not available right now. So the PanAm Post is a team of a dozen full-time workers plus maybe 50 bloggers and contributors in total, and we cover the Americas, Canada down to Chile and Argentina. We do hard news, so economics, politics, social concerns, and in particular we cover what we see as authoritarianism or anti-free enterprise activity, including on the international level. So we particularly focus on immigration, freedom, and trade, multilingualism, and so I've been doing it 2.5 years, and I'm very proud of it. But the challenge is the financial side, and of late, because that's just the crux of the matter. That's your bread and butter. I've devoted much more of my attention to that side of the business as opposed to the actual production of news.
How did you find the motivation to go out and try and start working for the PanAm Post, knowing that it's a startup in a very crowded field of news delivery? What was your experience there? Well,
first, just like you, I started a podcast, and I had this big ego and thought that I could just become famous and just be so popular that my podcast would grow and I'd just make money through advertising. That was just my simple thinking. And I had no real experience outside of just working as a writer or editor for think tanks or other research organizations. And that was a big flop, actually. It wasn't a big flop, but it just didn't pay the returns financially. And that's again why. So I did the radio show for about 2 years and had all these incredible guests and lots of followers and had a great time. But I just learned that you have to monetize these operations. And that's when I met an investor who was eager he really liked my work. And he said, look, Fergus, why don't we work together on this new media outlet? And because I'd already had a great affection for Latin America, all throughout the continent. I'm a Canadian citizen. And I said, that's wonderful. I'll lead this project. And I went down to Colombia to fix my Spanish and began it there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you started the podcast as a hobby with expectations of cash flow in it, and this was going to be
right.
your revenue source. But you didn't see a lot of the financial value that you were hoping to see. So as an entrepreneur, you started looking for, okay, what other type of value do I see in this podcast? Is it networking? Is it being able to get some of my thoughts on tape and put out on the internet to start building a portfolio? Is it that maybe this is going to open up a door for another entrepreneurial venture, which it did for you, but being able to pull back and say, okay, this isn't working financially. There's not a lot of value financially here. Where is the value? I think that's a key personality trait of a good entrepreneur, is to be able to recognize value for value's sake. And
yep. Yeah, I don't rule out podcasting. I think there actually can be value, but I did not. I mean, I should have sought both more mentoring and planned it out better, and not just been such a crazy risk taker and just basically just dropped everything and just gone into it. But so I still think there is value in podcasting, and obviously I love what you're doing with this venture. You just have to learn how to connect it with some kind of service of your own that you're going to be selling. And at the time, I hadn't really worked that out. I just thought advertising, but I think that is not exactly a sharp way to finance, because you face sites like Google and Facebook and Twitter, which have audiences that you will never be able to compete with.
Right. So where did you start trying to find additional value during the podcast? So it became obvious that the financial aspect of it wasn't working out for you, and you didn't give up the podcast. Can you walk us through your mindset there?
Yeah, well, it was actually a little bit unfortunate because I had I did find an advertiser who sponsored me, but it wasn't enough to live on. And I actually came into financial difficulties at the time that I had been. It took me a very long time to build the audience that was really necessary to generate an advertiser or to make it worth his time. So I had basically run down the money I'd set aside to invest in it and hoping to get a return. And when that just came to an end, I just said, "Look, you can't keep throwing more money into this. You've got to find something else." And yeah, so the project that I lead now, the PanAm, there really was and almost still is a vacuum in this regard that we are tapping into.
So where do you see PanAm starting to create revenue in the future, or how do you see it sustaining itself in this new medium of online news?
It's a fascinating topical question because, so it's going to be multiple revenue streams actually. I mean, of course, we still will have advertising, but it just won't be sufficient. We're not going to just say no to all advertising, but the overall trend in the media right now is it's going in many different directions. First, there's more state media, so just basically taxpayer funding, which I think is a terrible way to do media. But that's basically a large, or perhaps the majority of all media that exists in the world is still state controlled or state run. I mean, even in Canada, we've got the CBC, this Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the dominant media outlet. It's crazy to me. And in New Zealand, it's the same. So you have this is actually growing. You have the rise of state media and taxpayer funding, and then you have the rise of what I call sugar daddy websites, which are basically where wealthy people believing in free speech or believing in the news will simply bankroll a media outlet. And that's happened with The Intercept, with the Washington Times, and then with a whole host of nonprofits now that are explicitly nonprofit. But so you have basically a whole bunch of donations, and then from varying degree, from one donor to then a whole bunch of donations. Now, the one bright spot, which is where I see the PanAm tapping into, and I'm very excited about this project. I'm actually working on the site web redesign and integrating this into the site. Is the limited, or what I call a soft paywall, a limited subscription where you maintain the premium or exclusive content for paid subscribers, and then you can offer a range of benefits. You can say that if you're a subscriber, or if you pay a bit more, you can join a private discussion forum with the actual members of the staff, so you're basically part of the team almost. Or you can actually have an ad-free website experience, such as Pandora, where usually if you listen to the site, you get ads intermixed with the music. But if you pay them, I don't know, $8 a month, they'll give it to you ad-free. And then just some content, whether it be older or with the premium, will only be available. And this is where I think the beauty of entrepreneurship does come forward, where we have to identify the content on our site which is just must see or must read, that people will pay for. We also have to actually change our content and say, look, there are these clients out there, perhaps maybe more business clients that are willing to pay for subscriptions, whereas people may not be willing to pay on a personal level. And what content do they want? Do they want more just straight economic news as opposed to ideological, aggressive commentary from us? And this is an ongoing process. I've spent a lot of time building a team and making it sharper and sharper so we can justify this. Because if you're going to ask people to pay, you have to have value or the quality to offer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if I see something very well produced, like again, I'm going to go back to Brett Venat and School Sucks Project. This is a podcast that I've donated for a long time because he does such a high quality, edit job and just puts together such a high quality podcast that it's very enjoyable. Just the podcast itself, the format's very enjoyable. And the content, nobody's really going after the content. So I think that that's something that is similar to what you guys at PanAm Post are doing, is you're offering this content which is definitely not mainstream media. And there's a niche out there. There's people that are desperate for another outlet, and even down to the smallest blog, right? I used to have a blog called Mises Pieces where I would try to put together the pieces of life and economics. And, I never got more than a couple hundred subscribers or visitors a day to the page. But, it's that outlet, it's that digital subscription model that is still being figured out. You sent me an article that says the New York Times profit tops estimates on digital subscribers. So these are people willing to pay for digital content who may never have bought their newspaper or bought a magazine because they don't care to have it on that regular basis since there's so much competition out there. They'll want to pay for maybe, 10 premium articles a month or something like that. The creativity of the entrepreneur in this digital subscription and news service space is really interesting. And what do you think about micropayments now that we have cryptocurrencies? Do you see that being integrated in PanAm Post in the future?
It is, yeah. So we have, almost as a matter of pride, we've resisted any donations, but I suspect that when it comes to we actually having paid subscriptions, that a lot of people will subscribe, not because they necessarily have to have our content, but because they just really believe in what we do. And I'm not going to turn down that money and say, no. But I have considered that. We just haven't implemented that yet. I mean, that's another revenue stream. I think the whole idea of tipping reporters, is great. And it just seems to be that is on the rise, that readers recognize the problem, that they see that newspapers are going down, and maybe they don't realize, but the fact is that they're being replaced by government media to a large degree. And even in the United States, I don't know if people know, but I think the federal government has something like 12 different basically propaganda outlets, as far as I'm concerned, that they fund to the tune of many tens of millions of dollars. And so people see that challenge and are willing to donate. I mean, I much prefer to find content that they want so much that they would just give the money because they want it, not because they have some gushy feelings. And my concern too is that if you run on pure donation, I sometimes fear you're selling an invisible product, because you're selling a product that is impact. Or say people support you because they want to, say, change the world, or because they want to get news out to other people, but they can't really measure that. But they can measure what they want. And I fear that this is one of the reasons why I'm skeptical of the nonprofit sector, that people donate to get a certain feel-good feeling, mm-hmm. and not necessarily to please themselves. And I'd much prefer the second, providing content that they want and are willing to pay for. And that's the greatest intellectual challenge to me. And because I could easily go to some wealthy people and say, look, why don't you give us $50,000 or $100,000? And many of them would actually probably say yes. But I don't really, I guess you could say that is somewhat entrepreneurial, but I much prefer to not have to do that. I don't like begging, and I'd rather add value.
Right. Yeah, the donation model is got to be very difficult. This is something that we haven't had the means to even do on any type of scale before the internet and before easy payment systems. Let me just say one thing about that though. I'm not against donations at all. I just have concerns about it, and I think, as you mentioned, that the technology is changing so much now that we can do a much better job. That nonprofits are going to have to be much more competitive, because in the past they've not been. They've been extremely wasteful, in my experience. And the fact is that there are people out there who are wealthy or who do have money to donate and are basically looking for good causes. So in some ways you can serve that market to some degree. You can add value and add better value than other people who are trying to serve that market. So my hope is that, this technology that you refer to, such as these micropayments or whatever online or Bitcoin payments, will raise the level of competition for nonprofit or for donations. And I want to say too that one of the challenges with this whole nonprofit idea is that many people do it because it's tax deductible, at least in the United States. And that comes with all kinds of paperwork problems, because to be a nonprofit, you have to comply with certain standards, such as not endorsing politicians, for example. Whereas as a media outlet, you don't want to have any challenging or you don't want to have any fears regarding what you say or do. And being an explicit nonprofit puts you into that challenge. Yeah, someone told me a long time ago that the best place to get rich was to work high up in a nonprofit.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I think that I've seen articles or descriptions of the salaries that many of these think tank presidents make in the United States, and it is just out of control. I mean, for example, the president of the Heritage Foundation would be making more than $1 million a year.
Wow.
And the president of the think tank in Texas, the National Center for Policy Analysis, the last guy was I think making around $600,000. And I'm just kind of shocked that anyone would donate to those guys. I don't think they merit that kind of money.
That's not a small chump change, is it?
Of course not. I mean, let me say this: our entire PanAm Post budget is less than their salaries, and we would get enormous. I mean, if you gave that $600,000 to me, let's just say I'd give you a better deal than these guys.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, Fergus, tell us, how has your entrepreneurial experience provided more freedom for you in your life?
It's really no comparison, actually. I look back and I don't know how I did it before, because so I think the key is that I'm leading an operation as opposed to being just a worker, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a worker. You know, people work very hard, and it's not an honorable thing to do. But maybe it's a personality trait. But I wanted to explore. I wanted to challenge the status quo, and I didn't have the patience to just follow the conventional line. So, and how's it made me freer? It's basically let me live the life that I want to live. I mean, that's the basic, goal. That I knew that I wanted to be more confrontational, outspoken in my views, as opposed to being more, carrying the conventional line. And I also knew that I wanted to continue exploring the world. And it just so happened that I was able to start an outlet or lead an outlet that covered a continent. And now I've been to almost every country on that continent and almost every state, or province. So it's just been, in terms of giving me a more satisfying life, there really is no comparison. And I look back to my old job in North Carolina, where I was working at a think tank, and some of my colleagues would not take their vacation time, for example. They would accumulate vacation over the years. I could not believe this because I'd always break the rules and take more vacation than I was allowed. And I just didn't know how anyone could become so institutionalized and just basically sit in the office all year round.
Yeah, the ability to control your time is amazing. That was one of the first things that I really started noticing when I became an entrepreneur, is that, oh man, I now control 24 hours of my day. Do I want to sleep for 4 hours? Do I want to sleep for 12 hours? How long do I want to work? Where best do I see myself today, using my talents to try to build value and build wealth and make partnerships to do business with more people? I control all of this now. I don't have anyone telling me what to do. I write my workflows and I do what I think is the best for me every single day. And you're going to have some days that aren't as productive as others, but you're in control, which is, a real part of freedom.
Yeah, well, let me say too that even with the people who I hire to work with me, I do as much as I can to make them independent entrepreneurs in their own right. So, for example, we don't have any people. I hire no one as an actual employee. Officially, everyone is a freelancer, and I give them extremely flexible hours. I try and make them even have their own side projects, so they basically have personal development. So, for example, I'm hiring a girl in Colombia. She's starting on Monday, and she is also organizing conferences in her home country. And I think that's great. I want her to continue that. I don't want her to be a one-dimensional person who just works for me.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, if you had some advice, do you have any advice for young entrepreneurs out there, someone who hasn't taken that leap yet for whatever reasons? Maybe they don't think they have the money, they fear not having the stability of a job. Do you have any advice for young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think get started right away, because I think it's a long-term learning process, and the longer you put it off, the longer it's going to come to fruition. It's been a long-term process for me, and I would also discourage university in general. I think it basically delays the inevitable, because in my late 20s, when I went out on my own more so, I basically had to, and I'm still learning these basics of leading an organization, of financing, of running the books, whatever. I never learned anything of that in conventional education. And I could have easily, and I looked into going back to university for graduate school, getting a master's degree in economics or something like that. And I just think that would have made me a 30-something-year-old getting started. So if I were a young person, just do something to get the ball rolling. Be it selling your services on a freelance basis, or there are like meetup groups in your home area, whatever, anything you can do to get the knowledge growing inside you, or finding a mentor, because you're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes, too many that I'm happy with, and that for me to be happy with, and so. The big problem is the cultural problem of not being taught entrepreneurship at a young age, or being promoted, or having it being respected, and then having to pick that up. Many of us, once we've gone through way too many years of useless education.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Even for me, I got 2 bachelor degrees in engineering, and I wish that instead of spending those 4.5 years getting those degrees, I would have been out just trying some type of business, networking with people, trying to develop my own sense of my value, and fell a lot more. Instead of failing on a test, right, I wish I would have failed in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, even with my podcast, and even with your podcast too, I would have loved to have done this. I wish that when I was 20, I'd started this podcast, and then I could have blown away 2 years and it wouldn't have mattered. But now I did it when I was, say 26 or something like that, and it did matter that I couldn't just do it. I didn't have 5 years to play with.
Right, and now, I completely understand. The years in our 20s are the years that we're much more flexible. We don't have near as many bills or obligations or responsibilities. Those are the years that we can go out in the marketplace and try and fail. But instead, we're locked up with 4 hours of homework every night and have to go to class every day.
Yeah, and I don't want to say people just drop out of college, because I know that's I don't want to give any kind of general rule like that. Some people get value out of college or higher education, and some don't. I would just say that find the way to get through it quickly. There's a great book, Lies, Damn Lies, and College Admissions, and it describes how you can basically get through college and get great grades without doing a lot of work, which by the time I got to near the end of my years in college, that's what I was doing. I was just kind of like enjoying the rest of my life and getting through college more swiftly. Right,
exactly. So, Fergus, I have some lightning round questions for you real quick. You can take as long or as short amount of time as you would like, all right? The first one is, can you share a tool or a shortcut or a hack that's helped you succeed?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to address this. Let me get out of I'm going to break the lightning round rule here and address it more broadly. But
sure.
First, we use for the PanAm Post, we use an internal social media discussion platform that allows us to basically have this sort of real-time engagement and production, and the boon to our productivity from this has just been enormous. I mean, I would just say that if you think you're going to beat your competitors just by working harder, that is a bad idea. So, because we already work hard, many other people work hard too.
And what's the name of this tool?
It's just called Convo.
Convo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Convo. Yeah. And I almost don't like to share it because I think it's just so powerful. I almost don't want my competitors to use it. But,
I know there's a couple other ones out there that you can use that are IM type or management type of IM structures or whatever it's called. But go ahead, Fergus.
Yeah. So in the past, but before we did that, we were just on Skype and then email, and the comparison is just enormously different. So and now I'm always looking for technological edges that we can have over other outlets or over other competitors. So, and I know, particularly because we're a small organization, we can be more nimble in this regard, and we can make changes just when I say, basically. And so, for example, right now, I am, with my redesign of the website, we're going to have not just real-time discussion about content and headlines and every other matter. We're going to have real-time editing and journal and writing. So basically, just like in Google Documents, where if you go into an article or a file, you can be writing the content and someone else can be in the same file editing at the same time. And our new website is going to have that function, that capacity, so that the journalist can be writing the article and the editor can be on the same article, refining it so it can go live immediately.
Yeah, that's great. I use Google Docs for all of the projects that I'm currently working on, and it's amazing how when you have multiple people editing and completing the content of a doc, how information just gets put down so quickly. All of a sudden, you have this vast database of information because you have so many people willing to.
Yeah.
Let's take 2 hours, guys, and let's just get all of this stuff in our heads down on Google Docs. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, actually, I strongly believe in this crowdsourcing. So we do that with headlines, for example. We've got 12 people, and anytime we're discussing a headline, anyone on staff can weigh in if he wants to. Sure. And I mean, I just think that adds great value.
I know that you gave a previous book recommendation, Lies, Damn Lies, and College Tuition, which will...
College Admissions, yeah.
College Admissions, and we'll put the link to that down in the show notes. Do you have another influential book that you'd like to recommend?
Yeah, well, I wrote an article about the 10 books that most influenced my life, and I want to give them... The one that is most related to business, it's not necessarily about business, but the one that motivated me to get out and do my own thing is How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by Harry Browne. I assume you've heard of that one.
Yeah, of course.
And it wasn't just the book, because Harry Browne, I mean, he passed away almost 10 years ago now. But when I was a college student, I didn't really enjoy my classes so much, but I used to love watching debates, and I came across Harry Browne because he used to go on these political debates back in the 90s, and I just learned a great deal from him. I watched lots of his videos, listened to his shows, and then read his book.
Who is an influential entrepreneur in your life or a role model that you respect?
There are two. Well, there are two that I think of mostly. I mean, of course, the known one or public face is John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods Market. I just think that guy's extremely successful, and I admire what he has done, and also admire the fact that he's both an entrepreneur and a public intellectual. That I would love for more entrepreneurs to not shy away from taking on basically the socialist narrative of the, quote, intellectual community. And so I admire him greatly. He quit college and just started his own business, and look where it has taken him. And I think that takes a lot of courage, and he did the hard yards. He saw that people wanted, say, better value, better quality groceries, and there was a growing market of people who could afford to pay for it, and he jumped on it. And so I admire him greatly. I've seen him speak a bunch of times, and encourage more people. I personally want to follow that lead of being, challenging the status quo and finding a place to add value. But on a more personal level, I see my father as an entrepreneur. And it's not conventional to be a farmer. He's a sheep and cattle farmer in New Zealand. But this is one of the challenges with education, that when I was growing up, my teachers actually looked down upon workers like my father or laborers. But now that I'm older and I guess somewhat wiser, I look at my father. He runs this very large agricultural operation, and the challenge of managing your resources, because you have all these different resources, from forestry to your water supplies to fertilizer. What are you going to produce? How are you going to use those resources to provide the market? And so I admire the work that he's done, that he's been successful, and in doing so, he provided for a family of 6 children. And I thought he was also a very ethical man in doing that. That he is. I think that work he has done in providing. He's actually an organic farmer. Of providing good quality food to a community is second to none. I think what more noble entrepreneurship activity can you do?
It's beautiful whenever you can learn the entrepreneurial process, or just start getting a peek of what it means to be a businessman or woman or an entrepreneur from your family, the people that you spend the most time around for your first 15, 16 years of your life. It's really wonderful. That is where entrepreneurship, I would hope, would be learned, right? You would see your parents working and owning a small business, or even if they're just selling their skills on Odesk or Fiverr or something like that, but imparting that type of knowledge and wisdom into their children instead, where we send them off to public schools most time. Yeah.
And even then, though, too, my parents, they had a somewhat renegade mentality. I mean, obviously, they were organic farmers, which, has its pros and cons, but they were frustrated at my education, too. And for a while, my mother homeschooled me, and then they sent me away to boarding school.
Well, Fergus, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just fascinating, your experience through coming to the States, to go to college on a sponsorship, to traveling around and visiting to conferences and giving speeches, and now as the editor-in-chief and managing the PanAm Post, which is, I wish you all the best. Is there anything you would like to plug, or how can the listeners get in touch with you?
Well, of course, they can just follow my Twitter, Ferg Hodgson, at Ferg Hodgson, or they can go to my Facebook page, Fergus Hodgson. But there's just one thing I'd like to say to people out there who are listening, and this is something that I'm just very conscious of, that I really believe that going your own way is worth the risk. That I look back on my years in New Zealand, and when people just expected me to go become, say, a high school teacher because I had a knack for economics. And I think it's a crazy comparison. That life has been so much better. There have been tough times, but I think that it's worth taking that risk, and I want to encourage other people to do so.
Thank you so much. Take care, buddy.
No problem.
Thanks again for listening to episode 4, Our Athletes Entrepreneurs, with Fergus Hodgson. Please like our Facebook page and subscribe to our RSS feed from the website. Come back next week for a new interview with another Liberty entrepreneur.